What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ranked by James, where today, in continuation yet again of our series counting down the top 10 greatest horror movies of a certain decade, we've reached the 1990s. Now, the 90s was kind of an interesting list to come up with. I kind of noticed while making this list that it's a decade that's more about quality than quantity. Like, when you think about the horror movies of the 2000s or the 1980s, like, there's like rapid fire in succession, just a bunch of horror movies, right? Horror classics and slashers and all that kind of stuff, but a lot of them really, when you look at it, aren't really necessarily like these 5-star classics, right? But the ones from the 90s that are, even though that there's not very many, are like legendary movies. So today, we're here to count down the top 10 greatest horror movies of the 1990s. So at number 10 is going to be a movie called Wolf. Now this one is actually pretty interesting, and it's also not really what you'd think. It's a werewolf movie starring Jack Nicholson as the main werewolf. So you think like, holy crap, this movie is about to be wild. And it is, but it's also kind of like a workplace drama. Like, Jack Nicholson is like the chief editor of this book publishing company, and it's honestly more about his kind of rivalry with this like young up-and-comer who wants to take his position by any means possible. But then, you know, by the end of it, of course, there's a giant werewolf brawl. So if you go into it with the right expectations, thinking of it as more of like, not necessarily like this crazy werewolf horror movie, but more of like a drama, the story is actually pretty interesting and compelling. And then all of a sudden, Jack Nicholson turns into a werewolf, and this other guy turns into a werewolf, and they fight it out, and it's awesome. It really is. I think it's a really cool movie. I think it's underrated. And honestly, just for the cast and names involved alone, this has to make the list. At number 9 is another interesting one, because that's actually a TV movie that's a legacy sequel to a movie from the 70s, and that's When a Stranger Calls Back. Now, this is one of the most underrated horror sequels of all time. I think that it's honestly like twice as good as the original, and the original's not even that bad. Like, it brings back the two main characters, the sheriff and the girl, the babysitter from the opening, and it follows this kind of weird like ventriloquist guy who's stalking them and is really like good at stalking them. Like, he's able to like paint himself into the walls like Quagmire at a Family Guy. But honestly, the scenes in this movie, you know, obviously not counting the opening of the original, are much more suspenseful and creepy, and you know, you have the guy like looming over the characters while they're asleep, and the ending sequence and ending stretch is great, and he's just so creepy, the villain in this movie. And the actors, I think, from the original movie who come back are now, you know, more like seasoned actors. They are better in this movie, I think, than the original, and it's really awesome and really underrated, and I think you should check it out. At number 8, we got John Carpenter's Vampires. Now, this one's on here just because of its coolness factor. Like, the last one was on here because of how creepy it was, but this movie's just cool. You know what I mean? It follows this group of vampire hunters as they go around like in the West. It's kind of like a Western horror thriller kind of thing. Like, they go around hunting vampires. Cool as all hell. The vampire designs and effects, I think, are pretty cool. It's not everybody's favorite. You know, not everyone loves this. And not everybody really even gives it a chance, because it's kind of in an era of John Carpenter's career where he wasn't really putting out bangers like he used to. Like, this is kind of sandwiched between two of his worst movies. Like, the movie before this was Escape from LA, and the movie after it was Ghosts of Mars. So, you know, that's not great, but this movie, I think, is incredibly underrated. I think the vampire sequences are awesome. I think the gore in this movie is really awesome. It's honestly probably one of his goriest movies. Like, it's not The Thing, but it's certainly up there. So I think that this movie absolutely deserves a chance because I thought when I watched it that it was awesome. At number 7, we've got The Blair Witch Project, an absolute classic. I mean, this movie literally invented a genre. Now, yeah, I know that Cannibal Holocaust was before it, whatever. That movie didn't really do anything but make people puke. This movie actually had a legitimate impact. Like, if you didn't have the Blair Witch Project, you'd have no, like, Paranormal Activity, the Wreck movies, the Visit. Like, you don't get any of that without the Blair Witch Project, and I do think that Blair Witch, to this day, is probably still the best. I mean, it's just so creepy and, like, ambiguous. Like, the fact that you don't see the witch, the characters just ultimately find themselves like going around in circles and hearing noises in the middle of the night and finding these weird symbols just made out of sticks and twigs and the rocks, and just there's so much about this movie that makes it so creepy and eerie without ever actually seeing the witch, the main villain of the movie. And I think that that's really awesome. I think that the actors really do an incredible job here in selling the fear of just being lost in the middle of the woods, and ultimately like how psychotic they end up becoming is very like realistic. Like, it's not over the top. Like, they just get increasingly more and more just like strange and just kind of losing their mind because of everything that's going on around them. I really think that this is an awesome movie, and I honestly am not surprised that people were genuinely afraid of this movie because they thought that it was actually real, because it really feels like it's actual found footage, which is something that most other found footage movies kind of fail to do. Like, this movie actually perfected that formula. So at number 6, we've got the one and only Candyman. Now, the word aura is thrown around pretty loosely nowadays, but if you really want to find a character with actual aura, like the definition, look no further than the Candyman. I mean, they literally have his first, major appearance, his first, like, full-length scene in this movie. They had the actress literally hypnotized in front of the screen. That's how brilliant this movie and this character is, that in the universe of Candyman, he could literally hypnotize someone just by showing up. And Tony Todd's presence in this movie and his performance and the voice is just so strong and like striking, and just everything about his performance is just perfect. And that's only part of what makes this movie so great, because the score is unbelievable. This movie probably has the best score out of any horror movie in the 90s. Like, I don't think that that's really a point that people would argue with me about. I think it's a classic score. And just the whole storyline about this just like cursed romance between Candyman and Helen, this normal girl who's just trying to write a report about the myth and the legend of the Candyman, who finally eventually attracts his attention, which just causes such a domino effect on her life and the rest of the movie. It's just so good. It's so brilliantly written and acted and performed by all the characters, and it's an absolute classic for a reason. Candyman is awesome. At number 5 is Stephen King's It. I mean, I told you this decade had some classics. Dude, this movie is so just wild and out there that I love it. It's definitely got its flaws, but Tim Curry's portrayal as Pennywise, it's just unbelievable, and I don't think that it can be topped. Like, as good as Bill Skarsgård is in the 2 movies and the TV series, there's just something about how Tim Curry in this movie actually acts like a real clown. Like, it makes sense why kids would gravitate towards him, because he really does look and act, and not necessarily sound, but he looks like a real circus clown when you come up to him, and he kind of acts like one, whereas the other portrayal as Pennywise, like, he's already just a demon. So, like, when kids come up to him, it's like, if you were a kid, would you really walk up to that thing? This movie is just so awesome. I think the lines that he has are so funny. Like, he's actually, like, cracking jokes that'll make you laugh, even though that he's this demonic space clown. He's actually wicked funny. It's so memorable. It's got so many memorable moments, and maybe that's because of the story that it's adapting. Maybe it comes from that, but still, a memorable movie is a memorable movie, and an awesome movie is an awesome movie. And even though that this is technically like a 2-part miniseries, it's gonna have to make the list because it's just, there he is right there. It's so classic. At number 4, another one of the greatest sequels in the history of horror, The Exorcist 3. Now, at first I didn't even realize that The Exorcist 3 was the 90s, but as soon as I found out that it was immediately put on this list and immediately put in the top 5 because it's just so good. Like, I watched the director's cut, so I actually haven't seen the theatrical cut that most people have seen yet, but in the director's cut, my God, Brad Dourif, like, this guy, Brad Dourif, I think is one of the most underrated actors of all time, because he's most well known for, you know, the goofy killer doll. But when he's in a movie, like Brad Dourif himself, he pretty much steals every single one that he's in. You know, whether you're talking about Halloween 2, or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or this especially, he is such a great actor with such, you know, screen presence that he makes this movie honestly better than it should be. Like, at certain points, it almost doesn't even really feel like an Exorcist sequel. Like, the version I watched, Pazuzu isn't even in it, but Brad Dourif and George C. Scott as Lieutenant Kinderman do such a good job playing out this mystery as to whether or not Brad Dourif is or isn't this Gemini killer, you know, a killer who was presumed dead, but now all of a sudden people are being murdered in the exact same way that he used to do it. And Brad Dourif, despite being locked up in solitary confinement, knows every single detail about each murder. You know, they play that mystery so well as to, like, what is going on, what isn't. Is it supernatural? Does Brad Dourif have, like, some sort of escape route? Is it not him at all? Is someone just informing him? It's awesome. This movie is so great, and I really do think that it's kind of underrated. You know, it's one that people do talk about when they talk about best horror sequels, but I think because of how, you know, weird The Exorcist 2 was, some people don't really give this one a chance. And I think if that's your feeling towards this movie, you should absolutely give it a shot, because my God, it's worth it. I only saw the director's cut, but I'm sure the theatrical cut is just as good. It's phenomenal. At number 3 is Misery. I mean, I'm sure you saw this one coming, and we all know why. You want to talk about performances? Look no further than Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes. One of the most diabolical, crazy, you know, obsessed fan that we've ever seen. You know, the whole story of this movie, this writer, Paul Sheldon, crashing his car in, you know, the middle of nowhere, where the only person who is able to save him is this former doctor who just so happens to be an absolute, you know, total, like, sycophant over him, and absolutely, you know, adores this series that he's writing called Misery to just the most crazy, over-the-top degree. It's almost perfect. Its commentary on parasocial relationships has only gotten more relevant as time has gone on, to where this movie is one of the most, like, relevant movies of its time to this day, just because of its whole plot and, you know, everything that goes down. It's an absolute classic for a reason. At number 2, I'm sure the only surprise about this movie being on this list is that it's not number 1, and that's Scream. I mean, obviously, if you're doing a list of the best horror movies of the 90s, and you don't have Scream on it, then I don't know, something might be wrong with you up there. This is a movie that, again, like the Blair Witch Project, just spawned so much. Like, all of the movies that came after Scream, like, there's kind of like a point in the 90s where it's just like, kind of, you know, maybe 1 or 2 horror movies each year will come out and they'll be pretty good. Scream comes along in 1996, and then in 1997, 98, 99, 2000, every single movie that comes out in the horror genre has some inspiration or influence from Scream, whether it's, you know, all the classics, Urban Legend, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Halloween H2O, Bride of Chucky, you know, Scream 2, so on and so forth. All are because of the greatness of this one movie and what it did and how it was able to flip the genre on its head to become this kind of like ultra self-aware movie where all the characters in the horror movie know that they're in a horror movie and they know all the rules and the tropes. And this movie especially is so great to watch because it's so fun while also being like creepy. Like, there's moments in this movie where Ghostface is actually like intimidating. Like, you don't think of Ghostface in the later sequels as like the intimidating, you know, horror villain that he is. You know, he's always flopping around and stuff, and he does his fair share of, you know, flopping around in this movie. But at the end of the day, in Scream 1, Ghostface is a legit villain. And all of the characters, from Sidney especially to Randy to Dewey to Gale to all the side characters like Tatum and, you know, everyone else, this movie is a generational classic. But number 1 is one of the easiest number 1s I've ever had to pick for a list before, and that's The Silence of the Lambs. I mean, easy pick, sure, but there's a reason for it. This is not one of the greatest horror movies of all time, but it's one of the greatest movies of all time. Everything, it's so great. I mean, you gotta start off with the characters. Jodie Foster as Clarice is one of the greatest final girls of all time. Easy top 10 if I ever made that list. And then, dude, Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. The dude's not even really in it that much. He's only got like 20 minutes of screen time, but it feels like he's in like every other scene because he's so great. Like, his screen presence in this movie, just, he like leaps off the screen. He feels like a legit psychopath, like a legitimate person in this, you know, psych ward or wherever he ends up at the end. And there's just so many scenes in this movie that just have you on the edge of your seat, especially once it gets to the third act where, you know, he's in Washington, D.C. and he comes out with that mask on in his most iconic look from the movie. From there to the end, your heart is pounding. No matter how many times you watch this movie, this is one of the most rewatchable movies of all time because that feeling never goes away. Every time you watch this movie, it feels like you're watching it for the first time. It's just directed so brilliantly that way. And the ending where they think they have Buffalo Bill and the FBI is all surrounding the house and, you know, the helicopter's flying in and all of that stuff is going on, but then they realize that they have the wrong house and Clarice is trapped in the basement, in the dark, with this total whack job psychopath. It's almost just mesmerizing. Whether you're talking about that or any time Hannibal Lecter's on screen, you're glued to the screen. You have to know what he's gonna do, what he's gonna say. everything about this movie, every aspect, whether it's the score or the acting or the directing or the camera work, the cinematography. It's all perfect. This is the greatest horror movie of the 1990s, and I don't think it even is close. So thank you for watching my list of the top 10 greatest horror movies of the 1990s. Let me know your list in the comments below, and let me know what you thought of mine. Would you change anything? Would you add anything? And if you made it this far in the video, I want to thank you very much. I think that that is awesome. And also, if you haven't seen yet, I also did lists for the 2000s as well as the 2010s, and coming up soon is going to be the 80s and the 70s and possibly the 60s, maybe even the 50s. We'll have to see. But until then, thank you very much for watching. If you would like to, the like button and the subscribe button are down below. They are free after all. But until the next video, whatever that may be, peace out.